The resignation letter was still trembling in Daniel Harper's hands when the doorbell rang. It had been less than 10 minutes since he walked away from the only stable job he had left in the world. The ink on the paper was barely dry. His kitchen was silent, except for the quiet ticking of the old wall clock and the soft breathing of his 6-year-old daughter asleep on the couch after another long night of fever and medicine. Daniel stood in the middle of his small living room, exhausted in a way that sleep could never fix. His shirt was wrinkled from a 12-hour shift, his eyes red from worry. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows of the tiny house he had struggled for years to keep. The doorbell rang again. Daniel frowned. No one visited this late. When he opened the door, his entire world seemed to pause. Standing on his porch, rain dripping from the edge of a dark coat, was the one person he never expected to see there. His CEO. Before the story continues, take a second to support the message behind stories like this. If you believe kindness and second chances still exist in this world, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel Kindness. And don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Daniel Harper had never planned to become a single father. 5 years earlier, his life had looked completely different. He had a small apartment in the city, a steady job in logistics at one of the region's fastest-growing companies, and dreams that seemed realistic enough to touch. Then everything changed in a single night, a late-night phone call, a highway accident. And suddenly Daniel was standing in a hospital hallway, holding the tiny hand of a 2-year-old girl who kept asking when her mother would wake up. She never did. From that moment forward, Daniel's world shrank down to one purpose, Emma. Every decision he made, every dollar he earned, every sleepless night was for her. Being a single parent was already difficult, but Daniel's job made it even harder. The company demanded long hours, strict schedules, and constant availability. His CEO was known throughout the building as a brilliant but relentless leader who expected perfection from everyone. Daniel tried to keep up. For years, he balanced daycare pickups, late-night emails, and early morning meetings. He learned how to braid Emma's hair while answering phone calls. He learned how to cook simple dinners while reviewing spreadsheets. And he learned how to hide his exhaustion behind polite smiles in the office hallways. But life has a way of testing people when they are already stretched thin. Emma began getting sick. At first it was just small things, colds that lasted longer than usual, random fevers, fatigue that made her fall asleep at the dinner table. Doctors said it was nothing serious, just childhood illnesses. Until one night when she collapsed. Daniel still remembered the sound of the glass of milk hitting the kitchen floor. The hospital visits began after that. Tests, appointments, waiting rooms filled with quiet anxiety. The diagnosis eventually came, heavy and frightening, a condition that required frequent monitoring, medication, and sometimes sudden hospital trips. It wasn't something that could be scheduled neatly around a corporate work calendar. Daniel tried to explain this to his managers. Some were sympathetic, others were not. Missed meetings began piling up. Deadlines slipped. There were days when Daniel sat in the hospital beside Emma with his laptop open, trying desperately to finish reports, while machines beeped quietly around them. But the company only saw declining performance. One morning, Daniel was called into a meeting room. His manager sat across the table with a tight expression and a printed performance report. The words were polite but cold. "Your reliability has become a concern." Daniel didn't argue. He didn't explain again. He had already tried. He simply nodded and went back to work. For months he pushed himself harder than ever. Less sleep, more hours, more stress. But nothing seemed to improve. Then came the day Emma's school called. Her fever had spiked again. Daniel stared at his phone while sitting in the middle of an important meeting. His heart pounded as he imagined his daughter sitting alone in the nurse's office. Something inside him finally broke. He stood up quietly, walked back to his desk, typed a short resignation letter, and placed it on his manager's desk before leaving the building. No dramatic speech, no argument, just a tired father choosing his child. That evening, Daniel carried Emma home from the doctor, gave her medicine, and wrapped her in a blanket on the couch. She fell asleep quickly, her small hand gripping his sleeve as if afraid he might disappear. Daniel sat beside her for hours. He knew what quitting meant: bills, rent, medical costs, all the frightening numbers that never stopped coming. But for the first time in months, he also felt something else. Peace. Emma stirred slightly in her sleep and whispered something he couldn't quite hear. Daniel gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Nothing else mattered. That was when the doorbell rang. When Daniel opened the door and saw his CEO standing there, rain falling around him in the dim porch light, confusion flooded his mind. The CEO, Marcus Whitaker, was a man Daniel had only ever seen from a distance in company meetings and corporate announcements. Tall, composed, always surrounded by executives and assistants. Seeing him standing alone on a small suburban porch felt almost unreal. Marcus looked at Daniel quietly for a moment before speaking. But instead of anger or disappointment, there was something unexpected in his expression: concern. Daniel invited him inside, still unsure what was happening. The house was modest: a worn couch, a small dining table, children's drawings taped to the refrigerator. Marcus noticed everything. His eyes paused on Emma sleeping on the couch, wrapped tightly in her blanket. For a long moment, the powerful CEO simply stood there, watching the peaceful rise and fall of the child's breathing. Then he turned back to Daniel. Marcus had received Daniel's resignation only an hour earlier. At first he thought it was just another employee leaving under pressure. But something about the note bothered him. It was too simple, too quiet, almost apologetic. So he did something he rarely did. He looked deeper. The HR files told a different story. Hospital leave requests, emergency absences, notes from school nurses. Years of consistent performance suddenly interrupted by a series of family emergencies. Marcus realized something uncomfortable. The company had been measuring productivity, but it had never tried to understand the person. So he drove to Daniel's address himself. Standing in that small living room now, seeing the truth with his own eyes, the situation became painfully clear. Daniel wasn't unreliable. He was drowning. Marcus sat down at the kitchen table and quietly asked Daniel about Emma. For the first time in months, someone in his professional life actually listened. Daniel explained everything. The illness, the hospital visits, the impossible balance between work and being the only parent his daughter had left. He spoke calmly, but exhaustion filled every word. When he finished, the room fell silent. Marcus leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. Finally, he said something Daniel never expected to hear. The resignation was not accepted. Instead, Marcus explained that the company had been expanding its remote operations department. A new leadership role was being created, one that could be done mostly from home, flexible hours, full salary, medical coverage. Marcus looked around the small house again. Then he said quietly that companies succeed because of people like Daniel, people who refuse to quit when life becomes difficult. But sometimes, those people need someone else to step in and help carry the weight. Daniel sat there in stunned silence. After months of fear and pressure, the sudden shift felt overwhelming. Marcus stood up to leave, placing a simple folder on the table. Inside were the details of the new position, along with something else, a company letter approving full medical assistance coverage for Emma. When Marcus reached the door, he paused. He looked back once more at the father sitting beside his sleeping daughter, and he said something Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is choose their family first. The rain had stopped when Marcus drove away that night. Inside the small house, Daniel sat quietly holding Emma's hand, staring at the opportunity that had just walked through his door. For the first time in years, the future didn't look like a wall, it looked like a road. Emma shifted in her sleep and smiled faintly, still dreaming, and Daniel realized something powerful in that quiet moment. Kindness doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it simply knocks on your door when you least expect it, and changes everything. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who might need a reminder that kindness still exists, and subscribe to the channel Kindness. And don't forget to comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories reach people who truly need them.